Hello students, welcome to Distinction Learning Platform, and on this platform you find revisions, tests, quizzes, a lot of stuff. So before we begin our lessons, make sure that you subscribe so that you can be updated with new upcoming videos. To make the story short, let us begin. And don't forget to like the video, okay? So in this video, we're talking about what? Nervous system, which is a very important topic here if we talk about what? Biology, okay? Nervous system. So what is nervous system? So remember that there are two systems in our body that help us to communicate with one another. Let's say if the body part, a certain body organ wants to communicate with another body part, basically they are going to use a certain system which we call nervous system. But there is also another system which we call endocrine system. That system uses what we call hormones in order to communicate with other body tissues or other body organs. Okay, so now here we're talking about the nervous system. It's going to use what we call electric impulse in order to communicate with other body organs. Very important to note, to take note. Okay, now what are we saying about the nervous system? So nervous system is what? So we define it by this one. We say it's the system of coordination dealing with, so we say dealing, well, let's just not dealing, let's just say involving nerve impulses in order to communicate with other systems or body tissues or organs, whatever. So it's a very interesting topic. So we're saying nervous system is going to use nerve impulses in order to communicate with the other systems like the digestive system, or maybe other body organs like the heart. Is going to use nerve impulse. So if you the moment you just see using nerve impulse, we are talking about the nervous system. Using hormones, we are talking about endocrine system. Okay, so since we know that it's a system of coordination, remember that how many systems of coordination do we have? We have two systems of coordination. There is the endocrine system and the nervous system. So basically this is also the system of a coordination, but this one is going to involve nerve impulse in order to communicate with other systems or body tissues or organs. Okay, yeah, because for me to speak like that, there has to be communication with the brain, with the mouth. Like there has to be a communication. That communication, it should be coming from the nervous system, or maybe coming from the endocrine system. So it's a very important system to understand. Now the question that you can ask is that how many systems, how many types of nervous system do we have? How many types do we have? We have two types of nervous system. So nervous system, how many types do we have? So let's talk about the types. So we have how many? Two types. What's the first one? The first one is what we call the central nervous system. So NS stands for what? Nervous system. So there's the central nervous system, and the second one is what? Peripheral nervous system. Two systems. Okay, if someone asks you to say how many types of nervous system do we have, you say two types of nervous system. Which one is the first one? The first one is what? Central nervous system. Which one is the second one? Is the peripheral nervous system. So let us understand. If you say central nervous system, so the moment you say this is central nervous system, what should come into your mind? So what should come into your mind is what? It's this one. So what should come into your mind is the brain. Okay, and what? The spinal cord. Okay, we'll talk about the spinal cord and the brain in future videos. Okay, so the moment they say the nervous system, so the central nervous system, yes, the central nervous system. Now what are the things that are under central nervous system? There's what? The brain and the spinal cord. If I ask you to say what are the parts or components makes up what is central nervous system. What can you say? You say brain and what is spinal cord. So the brain will come and talk about the forebrain, midbrain, and also hindbrain will come and talk about that. The spinal cord will also talk about that. Okay, how the structure of the spinal cord, everything exciting about what the spinal cord will come and enjoy about that. Okay, so this has no brain and spinal cord. Then let's go to the other one, peripheral. The moment you say peripheral, it means away from the brain, like that, okay, away from the central. So away, let's say, let me give you an example. If you say peripheral, so you see my hands, okay, my hand like that, they are away from the what, my main body part, like that. If it is away, I can say my hand are peripheral. Basically, they are what, away from the what, main body part, like that. So peripheral nervous system basically is a system that is what, that comprises of only nerves. They are away from the what, the central nervous system. They are away from the main body part. Okay, that's why if you talk about the peripheral nervous system, it's going to have only the what, nerves. So this one is going to have what, nerves only. So if I ask you to say, what are the components making up the peripheral nervous system? What can you say? You say nerves only, okay? Yeah, so those are the things that you can talk about. Now, the question that you can ask, you need to ask something. If you remember, if you studied about the endocrine system, you will find out to say for a broad organ to communicate with one another, it was using what? It was using hormones. Hormones are the chemical messenger, okay? Let me give you an example what I'm talking about, okay? What I'm saying is this. If this is the endocrine system, okay, let's just give an example from the what? Endocrine system. If this is an endocrine gland, this is an endocrine gland, okay? And maybe this endocrine gland wants to communicate with, maybe let's talk about our favorite part, which is the heart. Heart, which is capital letter H, okay? This endocrine gland is going to produce something. It's going to produce what we call hormone, okay? It's going to produce a certain substance which we call hormone, and it will go to the what? To the heart, and tells the heart to say, okay, start doing something that we need. So this is communication that we're talking about, okay? Now the question is, what about the nervous system? Here the endocrine system is using what? Hormones to communicate, okay? Hormones to communicate. But this one is going to use what we call let's remove this one. It's going to use something which we call nerve impulse. So if this is a nervous system, this is a nervous system here, whether central or peripheral, okay, it's going to produce which we call nerve impulse. Let's just say NI. It's going to produce nerve impulse, and it will go to the heart, and this stimulate the heart, okay, to say, okay, maybe at this point continue pumping blood out of the heart, okay? That information will come from the central nervous system, or from the nervous system, I guess. So that information, if it comes from there, but how does it go like that? It goes using what we call nerve impulse. If we talk about the endocrine system, it's going to use what? Hormone. So this nerve impulse will go there to the heart, okay? Now the question is, these nerve impulses, these electrical nerve impulses, they are like electricity. So do they use something in order to reach the heart, or they just walk alone like that? Yes, they use something. So these, they are going to use something like, let's say, I'm going to give you an example, okay? If I want to send someone to go buy something from the shop, okay? It's either that person that I'm going to send, they walk like on foot like that, okay, or they are going to board something. They are going to board a car or maybe a bus, okay? So they use something in order to travel. So also nerve impulse are going to use what? Something in order to what? Travel. What do they use? They use what we call neurons. So these nerve impulse, what are they going to use? They are going to use what we call neurons. That's why we need to talk about what? The types of neurons. So neurons, that's where the nerves uses in order to be transferred from the nervous system up to the what? Where they are needed. They are needed maybe to the heart, kidney, spleen, liver, a lot of what? Target organ. So this is what really happens. Now the question that we can ask is that, what are those neurons that I'm talking about? Those transporters, what are those? Okay? There are a lot. Okay, basically, let's just categorize them into what? 3. Don't worry, I've drawn for you, okay, so that we can name them, okay? So we've got the different types of what? Neurons. So let's talk about the neuron. So here, let's talk about what? Neurons. Let's talk about them. Here, let's talk about neuron. Now, question you can ask is that, what is a neuron? Okay, the definition, I'm going to write it here. So what is a neuron? Because this question can come, what is a neuron? A neuron basically is what? It's just a cell. So a neuron is a cell. Sometimes a neuron you can call it what? A nerve cell. So a neuron is a cell that transmits what? Electric impulse or nerve impulses. So what are we saying? A neuron, we are saying a cell is a cell that transport or transmit. You can use transmit or transport or transmit nerve impulses. Nerve impulses. Yes. These are like a bus. Okay? So a cell that transmits what? Nerve impulse to where? To a target organ. So they transport this one to a what? Target organ. So what is a target organ? Remember that if this is a nervous system, central peripheral, okay. Information is coming from there. Then the target organ is where the information is going to be received from, like the heart. Heart is the target what? Organ. So that's what they do. This is the intermediate thing, the neuron, where they are going to receive information from the nervous system and transport them to the target what? Organ. That is what we call a neuron. Now let's talk about the types of what? Neurons. Basically, there are what? How many types of neurons do we know? 3 types of what? Neurons, according to the function. Okay. So let's come here. So we've got this 1, 2, 3. Okay. Basically, you need to know how to identify the structures of what? Neurons. Very important to take note of that. Okay. So the first one, as you can see, this first one, and we'll go to the second one. Let's start with the first one. What is this neuron? Okay, this neuron, we are going to call it what? Motor neuron. This one, let's call it what? Motor neuron. So we're calling it motor neuron. So let's just say motor N, motor neuron. So I'll tell you the reason why I've identified as motor neuron, because the question can come like that. They can ask you like, identify this neuron, then you say motor neuron, then they ask you to say, give a reason for your answer. What can you say? Okay, we'll talk about that. Okay, don't worry. Then if you look at this one, as you can see, the way it is looking, we call it what? Sensory neuron. So we call it what? Sensory neuron. So N again, neuron N, sensory neuron. Then what about this one? This fun looking guy. This fun looking guy is what we call relay neuron. But this one is going to have a lot of names. Relay neuron. Sometimes it's going to be called what? Multipolar neuron. Sometimes it's going to be called what? Intermediate neuron. This guy has what? Has got what? A lot of names. He has relay neuron. He has also intermediate neuron. He also can be called what? Multipolar neuron. Whatever you want. Okay. Now the question that you can ask is that, what are the things that helped me, okay, to identify this is a motor neuron and this is a sensory neuron, this is a relay neuron. What are those important features that you can look for? Those are what we call characteristics. So let's talk about the characteristics of what? Everything. So let's talk about the characteristics of this. Characteristics. Okay, so characteristics of motor neuron. What is the first thing that you need to understand about the motor neuron? Okay, now we start talking about the structure that they have. You've seen this one, this thing, the round thing here, we call it what? A cell body. You've seen this one. This is what we call cell body. Okay, this thing. Okay, this is what we call cell body. And where can you find the cell body under a motor neuron? As you can see, it is on the at the end there. Okay, the cell body there, it is where at the end, and at the end are from biology what we call terminally located. So the first feature that you can use to differentiate the motor neuron from what? Sensory neuron, and from the what? Relay neuron is what? The motor neuron has got a cell body that is what? Terminally located. So what are we saying here? We're saying this motor neuron is going to have what? Cell body, which is what? So cell body. So let's just use initials to have more space. Okay, so CB, we're talking about cell body. Cell body terminal what? Located. Okay, cell body terminal or terminally located. So that's the first feature that you can what? You can see. What is the other one? Okay, let's try to identify another one. So you've seen this longer thing. It's more like a tube up to here. Okay, this thing. Okay, what do we call this thing? Do you know this thing? This part we call it what? Axon. We call it axon. Okay, as you can see, it is longer. This axon is longer from the cell body up to here. It is longer. So that's why we are saying the axon for this is what? Longer. So axons are what? We are saying axons are longer. They are very, very what? Long. Okay, if you talk about what? The motor neuron, they are very, very what? Long. Okay. What else? What other feature apart from that? The other feature that we'll talk about is what? If you talk about this part, these are fun looking part, like the hair that are coming out like that, they look like hair. Okay, what do we call this? We call them what? Dendrites. So these spike things, these are what we call dendrites. What do you think dendrites are? They are what? Short what? Dendrites. Short dendrites. So we'll talk about the three main what characteristics that can help you to what? Understand that okay, this is a motor neuron, this is a relay neuron, this is a what? Sensory neuron. Three important what? Parts. Okay. Then before we go to this one, we need to talk about with another thing, important part. This part. Okay. This part in red. This one. Okay, that one. What do we call those little boxes? What do we call them? We call them what? Schwann. We call them Schwann. Okay, let me just write it somewhere so that you can see. So these red boxes, what do we call them? So we call it. So I'm going to write them here. Schwann. Like this. Schwann. So let me just use something else. Let me use the simpler words. We call them myelin sheath. Okay, we call them what? Myelin what? Sheath. This red thing. So let's just call them there. Okay, those red thing. Okay, so we call them what? Myelin sheath. Now, if you talk about, so I'll talk about the functions. Don't worry. Okay, I'll talk about the function of the myelin sheath. Okay, and the good example that you are going to be interested in. Okay. Then let's go to sensory neuron. Sensory neuron characteristics. The first one is what? Let's talk about the cell body. So here we talked about the cell body. Also here we talk about the what? Cell body. So under sensory neuron, the cell body is what? Is it terminally? No. As you can see, it is what? On the middle there. It's not terminally located. What can you say now? There it is what? In biology we use what? Axillary. So if you say axillary located, it means that it is on the middle. So what are we saying? Axillary located. So we're saying here axillary located. Okay, this is the first feature. What is the second feature under sensory neuron? SN. Sensory neuron, if you talk about the axons, what do you think about the axon? It will be what? It will be different. So let's use the blue now here. Axons, if here they are longer, here axons are what? Short. Okay. The question here, which one are axons? Okay, we've got two parts here. We've got this one and also which one? This one. Which one is what? An axon. That's the question. Okay. The axon is this one. The axon is what? This one here. Here on above here. So we'll talk about also this part. Okay. So the axon is where? Here. This is the axon above there. Okay. But what about this one? So this one is what we call dendron. Okay, so dendron and dendrites, these are just the same thing. If you say dendrite, a lot of structures. Dendron is just what? A single structure. Okay, so the dendron, it is the one that is connected with this. You see this red thing. This red thing is what we call what? A receptor. Okay, a receptor, very, very important part. Okay, so if you look at the receptor and it's always connected with what? The dendron. Okay, then the other part will be what? This tube is going to be called what? Axon. Okay, so that's a receptor. So now axons are what? Are short when it comes to what? to this type of neuron. What about dendrons or dendrites? So dendrons are what? Dendron are what? So dendron is what? Long or longer. It is longer. So three important what? Features. Okay, three important features for you to use so that you can differentiate between a sensory neuron and what? A motor neuron. What about this relay neuron? Okay, this relay neuron is not most of the time used to differentiate from other types of neurons, but basically I'll just talk about where you can find it. Okay, so this one you can find it where? In the what? You can only find it in the what? CNS, Central Nervous System. CNS stands for what? Central Nervous System. That's why you can find the what? A relay neuron. It's the one that's going to exchange information. You understand about that. It's the one that will get information from the motor neuron, from the sensory neuron, and transmit it into the what? To the what? Motor neuron. It's the one getting information from where? From the sensory neuron, and transmitting it to the what? Motor neuron. Why is that happening? It is happening in the central nervous system. Central nervous system comprises of what? Brain and what? Spinal cord. Don't forget about that. Okay. Now, what are the, so now, if we've talked about the parts, then what about this part? So this part, as you can see, this is the cell body, this is the cell body, also this is what? The cell body, okay? Remember that part, what do we call that part? That red part is called what? Nucleus, we know. What about this part? This part is what we call what? We call it what? Dendrites, okay? This part from the relay neuron. What about this longer part? This longer part now is called what? The axon. Okay, the axon. So those are the parts that you need to understand when it comes to what? The types of neuron and the structure that you need to what? Understand. Now let us talk about what? The functions. So functions, I'll talk about just important what? Function that you need to understand. Okay, let's start with this one, the axon. What is the function of the axon? This is the tube. Basically, it's the one that's going to help to transmit information from the cell body to the what? To the effectors, okay? We'll talk about this one, don't worry. So to the effectors. So the axon, what's the function of the axon? Get information from the cell body to the what? Effectors. That's the function of what? Axon. Regardless why it is, okay? Regardless of why it is, the function of axon starts to transport what? Electric impulses from the what? Cell body. That's a very, very important what? Function. Now, if you talk about the myelin sheath here, okay, although the dendrites, I'll talk about them, the dendrites, they also receive information from nearby what? Neurons, okay? But if we talk about the myelin sheath, these are very, very important what? Component of the neuron. Why? Because if you talk about, if I give an example, like if you try to pinch a child which is maybe less than 2 years, like that, if you pinch a child less than 2 years, they will take time to start crying. What would be the reason for that? Because if you pinch maybe an adult person, like a person who is maybe older, 16 years, the moment you pinch them, they're going to feel pain. But for a child less than maybe 2 years, it will take time for them to feel pain, and it will take time for them to what? To cry. Why? It's because of what? Their neurons, they don't have what? These myelin what? Sheath. They are not yet developed. Myelin sheath, what's the function of it? Is to just mean it just increases what? The velocity, the speed of what? The nerve impulse. So what is the function of the myelin sheath? So let us write here. So we said, what's the function of axon? What did we say, if you can remember? We said the function of this axon is to what? Transport nerve impulses. Transport nerve impulses from where? From the cell body. Okay, from the cell body to the what? Effectors. To the effectors. This is what we said. What about the myelin sheath? Myelin sheath, that I'll just say MS. Myelin sheath, what did we say? The myelin sheath is to what? Is to just transport what? It will just say what? Increase. So we was just saying increase speed of nerve impulse. Just to increase the speed of what? Nerve impulse. That's the function of that, okay? Yeah, so those are the important functions that you can talk about. Okay, now let us look at the last part. Okay, the last part, which is this one, nerve impulse transmission. So okay, since we've talked about the types of what, the types of nerves, okay, but we haven't talked about the function of what, the function of the motor neuron, the function of the sensor neuron, the function of the relay neuron. Okay, we haven't talked about that, but we understand it here. Okay, the function of that. Okay, so now let us talk about the nerve impulse what, transmission. The question is, how do nerve being transmitted from one nerve to another? From one nerve to another. So let us draw something, okay, so that we can understand. Okay. So let us draw this so that you can understand what we're talking about. Okay. Okay. Now let us look at this example so that you can understand about this diagram. Okay. Now as you can see, there are how many types of nerves that are here? There's this one, and also this one. Okay, these are what we call, this is basically we've got what, three types: motor neuron, sensor neuron, and relay neuron. So let us understand the function of these three neurons here. Okay, the first one is this one. Remember that, okay, if this is something, we're going to call it what, sensory neuron. So let us just call it this one as what, a sensory neuron, SN, sensory neuron. Then this one is going to be called what, motor neuron. I'll tell you why. Okay, this one will be called what, relay neuron. I'll tell you why. Okay, so sensory neuron, as you can see, if you find out why it is getting information, remember that to sense is to get information, right? To detect something, okay? No wonder we've got what, sense organs, okay? So what I'm saying is that sensory neuron is going to detect information from what, sense organ, okay? And sense organ, what are they going to have? They are going to have something important, receptor. Okay, they're going to have what, something important, what, receptor. So what is a good example of a sense organ that's going to have receptor? Let's pick a good example like the skin. Let's just get what, the skin. The skin is a good sense organ, and this skin is going to have what, receptors. And these receptors are connected with what, sensory what, neuron. And this sensory neuron is going to take all the information from these receptors or from the skin to where? The central nervous system. Central nervous system has what and what? It has brain or the spinal cord, BS, brain or spinal cord. Okay, so that's why it's going to take what, the information. Okay, yeah. So since we've understood number, now what can you say? So what is the function of the sensory neuron? What you can say is this. Okay, the sensory neuron is going to get information from the receptors and take that information to the central nervous system. That is the function. So we put the arrow for this. Okay, as you can see the way it is getting information. So it's getting the information from the receptors and taking it to the central nervous system. Central nervous system has what? Brain, and what? It has the spinal cord. Okay. And inside the spinal cord, there is something interesting, which is what? Relay neuron. This is the what? Relay neuron. Okay. So relay neuron, remember what we said. Here, if you come here, the relay neuron here, it has what? It is found in the what? Central nervous system. That's why you can find the relay neuron. Okay. That's why you can find it. So this is the central nervous system. Okay. Now, what is the function of the relay neuron? The relay neuron now is going to get information from this now. From the sensory neuron to the what? To this motor neuron. Okay. So it's going to pass this information. This information, the moment it reaches the what? Central nervous system, the information will pass on like that to the what? Motor neuron. And the motor neuron now is going to carry information from the what? Central nervous system to this part. What do we call this part? Not the receptors, but the effectors. Okay, so don't get this like confusion. So receptors, they're under what? Sensory neuron. Effectors, they're under what? Motor neuron. What could be the good example of what? A receptor, an effector. An effector could be what? Muscle. So it could be skeletal muscles, cardiac muscles, or smooth muscles. So let's just say what? Muscles. Okay, like that. So if I ask you to say what is a good example of what a receptor, an effector is what, you can say muscles.